heard there was a talk about mixed race earlier today, so I'm half Japanese, so that's part of my identity. So I'm going to talk to you today a little bit about architecture and design, which is what I do, and the power that I think it can really hold in society. So if we look historically at just a couple of examples of big architecture, we see that it usually is used to kind of express the power of big institutions. So we're talking about usually God or the state. So here you see St. Peter's Cathedral in Rome, a huge building to represent a huge power of God. Or Chartres Cathedral in France, where from every point in that town, you can always see the cathedral, and it serves as kind of a constant reminder of the power of God over you. Or the power of corporations. You see the Singer sewing machine company built the tallest skyscraper in the world at one point. And they ran ads showing this building and showing kind of by proxy how important their corporation was in the world. So we really think of this kind of architecture, or at least I do, as architecture that's designed by old rich white men for old rich white men. But I don't think that's not always the case of how architecture comes about. So just to tell you a little story about me, when I was a first-year architecture student, I was 21, 22, and I was really frustrated with my architecture program with school. I felt like it was completely esoteric. We were learning about all these things that had nothing to do with the big kind of social problems that I saw in the world. And my friend Michael went to see Paul Farmer, who works for Partners in Health, which is a big public health nonprofit. And Paul was talking about all of these buildings that they were building, all these roads they were laying. And Michael went up to him afterwards and said, what architects are you using to design these buildings? And Paul says, like architects, we don't use architects. I designed the last hospital on a napkin. And so we thought, wow, this is a huge disconnect. This means that there's a huge swath of society that is building buildings but not using architects. So 6 months later, Paul calls and says, we have to design a big district hospital in northern Rwanda in Africa. Do you know anybody that would be interested, or would you like to help design the building? And of course, what we should have said was, of course, we're just first-year students. We don't really know anything about that yet, but here's a list of great people that can help you. What we ended up saying was, sure, we'll do it. Not basically out of sheer kind of naivete of not knowing that we shouldn't have been able to take on a project that big. So we went to Rwanda and met with a lot of people, not knowing what we were doing at all. And we started to learn about a disease called tuberculosis. And I had never really heard of this disease before, except that I thought it was something like, I don't know, polio or consumption, something that was eradicated a long time ago and doesn't actually exist anymore. And I come to find out that TB actually, a third of the world's population is infected with the TB virus today. And it's a major world killer. And the problem with TB is that it's an airborne infection, which means it's spread through the air. So here you can see a guy sneezing or coughing and blowing his TB droplets out into the room. So if one person in this room was infected with TB and was coughing and was spreading that diseased air through this room, probably a few of us would actually contract TB before the end of this conference. Probably nobody in here has TB actively. So here you see TB is passed through coughing and sneezing, not through human contact. This means that it's actually a design problem because the way that you design a building affects how the airflow will move through the building, and that'll affect how the disease is spread. So in Rwanda, the standard healthcare center, you can see, basically there's 2 rooms on either side of a narrow hallway in the middle of a building. And that hallway in the middle becomes the waiting room. So all of the patients and the family members are waiting in that hallway. So the hallway becomes the space where the infection will spread because there's very little ventilation and the disease has nowhere to go, and so everybody else will be infected by the disease. So the simple solution that we came up with was basically to eliminate all interior hallways. And we made all of the waiting rooms, the waiting spaces, covered outdoor spaces, and we also raised the ceiling up higher to improve the ventilation. This isn't rocket science, but nobody had really thought of this before in Rwanda. So here you see kind of the different levels of fenestration or windows that we put in our buildings. Another small problem that we saw was that in the ward spaces where patients are basically like convalescing and they stay there for a couple of weeks, you usually have 2 beds where patients are staring at each other across kind of a central walkway. This means that the patients have no privacy. They're staring at other sick people all day long, and you have very little room on the walls to make windows for ventilation. So what we did was to flip the beds of how they were laid out so that now they're along a kind of a central conduit wall, and now the patients have more privacy. They're staring out at the beautiful Rwandan landscape instead, and we've freed up the walls to have larger windows so that air can move through the buildings more easily. So here we are during construction. That's me in the white tank top over there. And we used all local labor on this project. I took a year off of school, I should say. I moved to Rwanda and worked on this project. I had no idea I would do this beforehand, but I decided that it was worth it, and it was. And we had about 300 workers on site from the local community at any one time working on this project for about 2.5 years. And we also used a local crafts workshop, and so a lot of the furniture was also made on site. So it was a very local process. And here's the building completed. It actually opened this year, and this hospital serves a district of about 400,000 people. So that was pretty exciting for me to open. And so the building is designed around a series of interior courtyards. You can see one here. And everything is, all the buildings are color-coded so that it's very easy to find your way around the hospital. I'm sure you guys have dealt with the problems of finding your way around hospitals before. It's a nightmare. So here you see the interior of the women's ward. You can see that the center wall that I was talking about, the orange for the women's ward, the beds facing out, and then this company of these big fans that we had donated, which move air through the room. The company is actually called Big Ass Fans. So we thought that was pretty cool. And here's the blue of the men's ward, and the yellow of the pediatrics ward, the kids' ward. And here it is from the exterior. So it looks pretty different than hospitals in the area, other hospitals. And here's one of the outdoor waiting rooms. So I just want to tell you a quick story about the stonework that we used on the walls. So we really wanted to use this local volcanic rock on the walls. We thought it was so beautiful. It has this great texture. And all of the buildings in the area use this stone, but they have it this like really wide grout. It's like they paint everything. It's like really ugly. And so we thought we want to use it, but we want the stones to be really tightly fitted together like a jigsaw. And so when it came time to do the walls, we called the craftspeople over, the masons. We asked them to do a mock-up. And they did a mock-up, and it looked pretty much like that. And we said, no, do another one, make them closer together, and do another one. And they did about 15 mock-ups. And then finally we said, okay, that's the one. Now do the whole building like that. So they started work on one wall. They worked their way all the way around the building. And when they got back to the front of the building, they realized that their work had gotten so much better that they decided voluntarily to take down the first wall and rebuild it themselves for free. So here you can see their work in the end. And this is how the wall looks now. So this, I think, is the real power of architecture. It's not the power of big institutions to kind of broadcast their power to us. It's the power of regular, everyday people to take agency and make an impact on their own communities. And I know it sounds cheesy, but I really want to encourage all of you to be bold and take risks and think about how you can actually change your own community. Maybe there's like a bus shelter that could be redesigned, or a wall somewhere that could use a mural. I think as young people, we don't realize how much power we already hold, and I know that I didn't. But the truth is that you can have an impact on your community now, and you don't need to wait for somebody else to tell you what to do or to help you to kind of realize your own dreams. So I think together we can really start to prove that it's not just the old rich white men of the world that can accomplish amazing things. Thank you.